Reborn at 14. I refused the Prince Manor's pity marriage and went home. Play the full story in one go. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. The exciting story begins right now. The gold-flecked pink silk scroll lay flat on the sandalwood table, its bright color clashing with the quiet elegance of the Meng family reception hall. Steward Qian, dressed in a dark blue robe embroidered with the crest of the Prince Jing estate, stood with his hands tucked into his sleeves, his chin tilted upward. "Miss Meng," Steward Qian said, his voice carrying the dry, raspy tone of someone accustomed to giving orders. "His Highness has shown extraordinary benevolence. For a daughter of a merchant family to enter the prince's residence as a side consort is an honor that ancestral graves must burn with green smoke to obtain. Sign the document, and the pink sedan chair will arrive at your door on the auspicious day next month." I looked down at my wrists. The skin was smooth, white, and completely devoid of the raw, bloody scars that the heavy iron chains had left behind in the cold cellar. I raised my hand, slowly smoothing down the sleeve of my green silk robe. My father, Meng Sihai, sat on the mahogany chair beside me. His fingers gripped the armrest so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He looked from the pink scroll to me, his lips parting slightly. But no words came out. His shoulders, usually broad and strong, seemed to shrink under the weight of the royal crest on the steward's chest. "Steward Qian," I said, my voice steady and clear, echoing softly in the high-ceilinged room. "The pink color of the scroll is indeed eye-catching, but in the grand etiquette of our empire, only the primary wife is wedded with red, while concubines are taken with pink. Am I correct?" Steward Qian scoffed, a thin, patronizing smile playing on his lips. "Miss Meng, you are a clever young lady, but you must also understand status. The Meng family may possess mountains of gold, but in the eyes of the imperial court, you are still at the bottom of the four social classes. To be a side consort to Prince Jing is already a promotion beyond your station. Do not let greed blind you to reality." I stood up from my chair. The soft silk of my skirt swept over the polished floorboards. I walked slowly toward tea table, my eyes fixed on the pink scroll. "My father pays hundreds of thousands of taels of silver in taxes to the imperial treasury every year," I said, reaching out to touch the smooth silk of the document. "The grains from our granaries feed 3 armies on the northern border. The fabrics from our mills clothe the court officials. Yet, Prince Jing expects me to enter his gates through the side entrance, bowing to a main wife, and surrendering my family's wealth to sustain a crumbling household." Steward Qian's smile vanished instantly. His brow furrowed, and his hand dropped from his sleeve, pointing a stiff finger at me. "Presumptuous. How dare a mere merchant girl slander the royal house? Prince Jing's estate is grand and majestic. How dare you speak of it so insolently?" Instead of replying, I grabbed the edges of the pink scroll. With a swift, sharp movement of my hands, the sound of tearing silk shattered the silence of the hall. Rip. The gold-flecked pink scroll was torn clean down the middle. I dropped the 2 pieces onto the floor, right at Steward Qian's feet. "Meng Lan, you dare." Steward Qian stumbled backward, his face turning a dark, furious red. He pointed at the torn silk on the ground, his voice trembling with disbelief. "This is an imperial insult. You are bringing ruin upon your entire clan." My father gasped, half rising from his seat, his hand clutching his chest. "Lanner." I turned my head slightly, giving my father a calm, reassuring look. Then, I turned back to the shaking steward. "Go back and tell Prince Jing," I said, my voice cold as ice, each word dropping like a stone. "The Meng family's wealth was built copper by copper through hard labor. It belongs to us. If His Highness wants a woman who will bring her entire family fortune to pay off his gambling debts and the main wife's extravagant jewelry bills, he should look elsewhere. The Meng family does not buy humiliation." "You. How do you know?" Steward Qian's eyes widened in horror. The anger on his face was instantly replaced by a pale, sweating panic. He looked at me as if looking at a ghost. The secret financial troubles of the Prince Jing estate were closely guarded, known only to the innermost circle of the household. Our shops span the entire empire. Steward Qian, I said, taking a step closer to him. There is very little that happens in the capital's markets that does not reach my ears. If Prince Jing cannot even pay the interest on his loans from the Huifeng Bank, how does he expect to support a side consort? Guards. 4 burly family guards in dark iron armor immediately stepped into the hall, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. The heavy clatter of their boots made the floorboards vibrate. Send Steward Qian out, I commanded. If any more trash from the Prince Jing estate appears at our gates, throw them into the street. Meng Lan, you will regret this. The prince will not let this go. Steward Qian shrieked as the guards grabbed him by his collar and dragged him toward the courtyard. His expensive leather boots dragged uselessly on the stone path, leaving dark streaks. Once the gates slammed shut, the hall fell into a heavy silence. My father collapsed back into his chair, his face pale, sweat lining his forehead. Lanner, this is the royal family. We are but merchants. If Prince Jing uses his power in the court, our business, our lives. Father, I said, walking over to him and placing a steady hand on his trembling shoulder. Do you trust me? He looked up at me, his eyes filled with worry, but the iron resolve in my gaze seemed to calm him. He slowly nodded. Prepare the carriage, I told the head servant standing near the door. We are going out. Miss, where are we going? The servant asked, bowing deeply. To the Western District, I replied, my fingers tightening slightly. To the private residence of Minister Huolin. My father gasped again. Huolin was the chief of the Ministry of Justice, a man known as the Iron Judge, ruthless in his methods, and the deadliest political rival of Prince Jing. To seek him out was to step directly into the roaring flames of court politics. I walked out of the hall and into the courtyard. The autumn wind was crisp, blowing the fallen leaves across the stone tiles. I looked up at the gray sky. This time, the Meng family wealth would not be a fat lamb waiting to be slaughtered. It would be the weapon that brought the proud royal house to its knees. The black-painted carriage rolled to a halt in the deep shadows of an alleyway, 3 streets away from the imposing gates of the Hua estate. The scent of damp earth and late autumn rain clung to the silk curtains. My father remained in the carriage, his knuckles still white as he held a small wooden box containing our family's core ledgers. I stepped down onto the wet cobblestones alone, wrapped in a dark woolen cloak that hid the green silk of my gown. The side door of the Hua residence was guarded by 2 sentries in high-collared black uniforms, their halberds gleaming under the dim light of a single paper lantern. I did not approach the main gates. Instead, I walked directly to the side entrance and placed a heavy, lacquer-sealed envelope into the hand of the younger guard. Deliver this to Minister Hua, I said, keeping my voice low but steady. Tell him it is the accounting of the Huifeng Bank secret transactions from the 3rd year of the current reign. The guard frowned, looking at my plain cloak with suspicion. But the sheer weight of the envelope and the mention of the secret transactions made him hesitate. He nodded curtly to his companion and slipped through the small wooden door. Within 10 breaths, the door creaked open wider, and a middle-aged steward with a sharp, discerning gaze gestured for me to enter. I was led through a series of austere, stone-paved courtyards. Unlike the lavish, gold-gilded corridors of the Prince Jing estate, the Hua residence was built with dark pine and cold slate, reflecting the iron-handed nature of its master. We reached the eastern study, where the scent of bitter tea and burning charcoal filled the air. Huolin sat behind a massive desk of unpolished black ironwood, sorting through a stack of official court reports. He did not look up immediately when I entered. He wore a simple, dark gray robe with no embroidery, yet the sheer breadth of his shoulders and the sharp, defined lines of his jaw gave him an undeniable presence of authority. On the corner of his desk lay my torn envelope, already opened. A merchant's daughter, Huolin said, his voice deep, smooth, and entirely devoid of warmth. He finally raised his eyes, his dark pupils reflecting the flickering candlelight like polished obsidian. Meng Lan, you tore Prince Jing's marriage scroll at noon, and by nightfall, you are standing in my study. Tell me why I should not hand you over to the Ministry of Justice for treason. I stepped forward, letting my hood fall back to reveal my face. I did not curtsy, nor did I show any sign of fear. Because the Ministry of Justice has been looking for the source of Prince Jing's secret campaign funds for 3 years. Minister Hua. And tonight, I have brought you the key to lock his gates forever. Huolin leaned back slightly, his fingers tapping a slow, rhythmic beat against the dark wood of his desk. The Meng family has wealth. But wealth is easily crushed under the heel of imperial power. What makes you think you can play a hand in the court's chess game? I pulled a thick stack of high-grade paper from the inner pocket of my cloak and placed it gently on the edge of his desk. These are 10 banknotes from the Great Qian Imperial Treasury, each worth 10,000 taels of silver, 100,000 taels in total. This is merely my introduction fee to Minister Hua. Huolin glanced at the silver notes, his expression unchanging. Bribery of a court official is a capital offense. This is not a bribe, but an investment, I replied, meeting his sharp gaze directly. My father and I wish to purchase protection. In return, we will provide you with the financial records of every shop, pawn shop, and tavern that Prince Jing secretly owns in the capital. Within 3 days, I will cut off his cash flow. Within a month, his creditors will storm his gates, when he is desperate enough to embezzle the Southern River Conservancy funds to pay his debts. You will have the perfect evidence to present to the emperor. The study became deathly quiet, save for the crackling of the charcoal in the brass brazier. Huolin's eyes narrowed, his gaze searching my face as if trying to find any sign of hesitation or deceit. You speak of Prince Jing as if he is your mortal enemy, yet you were nearly his side consort. Huolin murmured, his voice softening into a dangerous, purring tone. A young girl of 14 should be dreaming of silk and jade, not orchestrating the ruin of a royal prince. Who is behind you? Meng Lan. My family is behind me, I said, my voice hardening. My father's life, my mother's honor, and the survival of the Meng clan. If I marry into the Prince Jing estate, we will be bled dry and discarded like trash. I prefer to use our wealth to buy his head instead. Huolin stood up. He was taller than I expected, his shadow stretching across the book-lined walls. He walked around the desk, stopping only a foot away from me, the scent of sandalwood and cold rain on his clothes pressed against my senses. He looked down at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. If I agree to this, Huolin said, his voice dropping to a whisper, you will be bound to me. If you fail, the Ministry of Justice will not shield you. I will personally write the execution order for the Meng family to ensure my own hands remain clean. I would expect nothing less from the Iron Judge, I replied, tilting my chin up to look him in the eye. But I do not fail. Tomorrow, the price of grain in the capital will drop by 30%. Prince Jing's private granaries, which he bought with borrowed money, will begin to rot. Huolin's lips twitched slightly, the faintest hint of a cold, amused smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. He reached out, his long, calloused fingers brushing against the stack of silver notes on the desk. Before sliding them into his sleeve, the ledger, Huolin demanded, extending his hand. I pulled a thin, leather-bound notebook from my sleeve, not the fake ones we kept for the tax collectors, but the real record of Prince Jing's secret debts to our family's smaller branches. I placed it in his open palm. His skin was warm, a sharp contrast to the freezing night air. Our partnership begins tonight, Miss Meng, Huolin said, turning back to his desk. But remember this, I am a hunter, not a protector. Do not let me find out that you are playing both sides. I only side with the winner. Minister Hua, I said, pulling my hood back over my head, and Prince Jing is already a dead man walking. I turned and walked out of the study, the heavy wooden doors closing behind me with a solid, echoing thud. The autumn wind outside was still cold. But as I stepped back into the carriage where my father waited, my hands were no longer shaking. The first piece had been placed on the board, and the trap was set. The silver abacus on the table clicked rhythmically, the ebony bead sliding back and forth under my fingers. Before me sat 5 of the most powerful grain merchants in the capital, their faces tense, their hands gripping their teacups so tightly that the green tea inside sloshed against the porcelain. Miss Meng, this is madness. Master Zhao, the head of the Capital Grain Guild, said as he leaned forward, his gray beard trembling. Prince Jing's Deshang grain depot bought up all the wheat from the northern provinces last month at 12 copper coins per dough. He expects to sell it at 20 when the winter snows block the mountain passes. If the Meng family floods the market now and drops the rice to 8 copper coins, we will all lose half our capital. I slid the last abacus bead to the top with a sharp clack. You will not lose a single copper, Master Zhao, I said, looking him in the eye. The Meng family's shipping fleet has already bypassed the northern mountain passes. 30 cargo barges laden with southern rice and wheat are docked at the Tongzhou Canal right now. I will sell this grain to you at 5 copper coins per dough. You will retail it at eight. You make a profit of 3 coppers per dough. While Prince Jing's Deshang depot sits on rot. The merchants looked at one another, their eyes widening. The tension in the room suddenly melted into a buzz of hurried whispers. 5 coppers. Another merchant, Master Qian, stammered. But the transport costs alone from the south usually exceed 6 coppers. How is the Meng family achieving this? The Meng family owns the canal toll stations from Jiangnan to the capital, I replied, my voice calm and even. For our fleet, there are no taxes. If you agree, sign the purchase contracts now. By dawn tomorrow, every grain shop in the capital must display the new price. 8 copper coins per dough. Master Zhao looked at the inkstone on the table, then at his fellow merchants. He picked up the brush, his hand no longer shaking. The Meng family's word has always been as solid as gold. I will sign. Within half an hour. 5 signed contracts lay on my desk. I did not stop to rest. As soon as the merchants left, I turned to my head steward, who was waiting near the door. Prepare my carriage, I commanded. We are going to the Huifeng Bank. The carriage rattled through the bustling streets of the capital, stopping in front of the grand, gray brick facade of Huifeng Bank. It was the largest private bank in the Northern Territories, and the primary lender to the nobility who spent beyond their means. Manager Liu, a fat man with a mustache that twitched whenever he was nervous, rushed out to greet me himself. He bowed so low his nose almost touched his knees. Miss Meng, what an honor. Please come into the private parlor. The finest Hongpo tea is already being brewed. I walked into the lavish parlor, ignoring the steam rising from the jade cups. I sat down on the mahogany chair and placed a wooden box on the small table between us. Manager Liu, I am not here for tea, I said, opening the box. Inside lay 10 deposit slips, each stamped with the grand seal of the Meng family treasury. The Meng family currently has 500,000 taels of silver deposited in your bank. These are the demand slips. Manager Liu's face turned from a rosy pink to a deathly gray in a fraction of a second. His mustache twitched violently. Miss Meng, 50,000 taels we can arrange by noon. But 500,000. To withdraw it all at once, it would drain our vaults. It would cause a run on the bank. I know, I said, my voice cold and pleasant, like wind chimes in winter, and I will withdraw every single copper unless you call in a certain debt by sunset tomorrow. Manager Liu wiped the sweat from his forehead with his silk sleeve. Which debt? The 200,000 taels lent to the owner of Deshang Grain Depot and Baoyuan Pawn Shop, I said, leaning forward slightly. We both know that the real owner behind those names is Prince Jing. But Miss Meng, Manager Liu cried, his voice cracking, that is a royal prince. The loan is set for a 1-year term, and it has only been 3 months. If we force him to repay it now, he will use his influence to shut us down. If you do not call in his debt, the Meng family will withdraw our 500,000 taels tomorrow morning, I countered. My eyes locked onto his. By noon, word will spread that Huifeng Bank has no silver. Your other depositors, the merchants, the minor gentry, the tavern owners will line up at your doors. By sunset, Huifeng Bank will be bankrupt. You choose. Manager Liu, do you want to be shut down by a prince next month? Or do you want to hang yourself in an empty vault tomorrow night? Manager Liu sank into his chair, his breathing ragged. He stared at the 10 deposit slips on the table, his fat fingers trembling so much he could barely pick up his teacup. But what reason do I give the prince? He whispered desperately. The Ministry of Justice is auditing all large-scale commercial loans to prevent illegal hoarding of winter grain, I said. Rising from my seat, I am sure Minister Huolin will be happy to provide the necessary official seals if you require verification. At the mention of Huolin's name, Manager Liu flinched as if he had been struck. Everyone in the capital knew that Huolin's dungeons were silent, dark, and rarely released anyone alive. I understand, Manager Liu said, bowing his head in defeat. The collection notices will be delivered to the prince's residence by noon tomorrow. I walked out of the bank and stepped into the carriage. As the wheels began to turn, I opened the window slightly, letting the cold wind cool my skin. By noon the following day, the capital was in an uproar. The price of grain at every guild-approved shop plummeted to 8 copper coins per dough. Crowds of commoners flocked to the streets, carrying baskets and sacks. Bypassing the empty, quiet storefront of Prince Jing's Desheng grain depot. At the same time, a fleet of 30 Meng family barges began unloading high-quality wheat at the docks, making it clear to everyone that the supply would not run out anytime soon. Inside the private office of Baoyuan Pawnshop, another of Prince Jing's secret properties, Steward Qian stood before a desk covered in ledgers, his face covered in sweat. Across from him stood the manager of the pawnshop, his hands shaking. What do you mean we have no cash? Steward Qian roared, slamming his fist onto the table. The prince needs 50,000 taels by tonight to pay the interest on his court loans. And Huifeng Bank just sent an official demand for the immediate return of the 200,000 tael principal. Steward Qian, the grain depot is a disaster, the pawnshop manager cried, wringing his hands. No one is buying our grain at 12 coppers because the Meng family is selling it at 8. We cannot sell our stock, and our warehouses are locked by the local merchant guild for violating pricing agreements. Now, our pawnshop depositors have heard rumors of a cash shortage and are demanding their silver back. We are completely dry. From the street outside, the muffled shouts of angry depositors could be heard, banging on the heavy wooden doors of the pawnshop. Steward Qian stumbled back, his face pale, his eyes wild with panic. The Meng family. It must be that merchant girl. Go to the palace. Tell the prince he must do something. I sat in the tea house across the street, watching the chaos unfold through the bamboo blinds. I raised my teacup, taking a slow, quiet sip. The first pillar of Prince Jing's palace had cracked. Next, it would crumble entirely. The scent of sandalwood incense in the Meng family's small ancestral hall was thick, coiling around the memorial tablets of my ancestors. I knelt on the silk cushion, my back straight, watching the thin trails of smoke rise toward the rafters. Outside, the sound of the autumn rain had turned into a steady, rhythmic drumming against the tiled roof. Manor. My father's voice came from the doorway, sounding older and more tired than he had just 2 days ago. A carriage from the Prince Jing estate is at the gates again. This time, it is not Steward Qian. It is the prince's personal guard commander, accompanied by a lady-in-waiting from the palace of Consort Shu. Consort Shu, Prince Jing's biological mother and one of the emperor's most favored concubines. I stood up slowly, brushing the dust from my knees. The pressure was escalating exactly as I had anticipated. When the son failed to seize the merchant's wealth, the mother would step in to exert the pressure of the imperial harem. Invite them to the main hall. Father, I said, my voice calm, and tell the servants to prepare the bitter spring tea. Do not use the premium leaves. Bitter spring. My father hesitated. Lanner. That tea is what we give to the low-level laborers to clear their heat. It is incredibly bitter. Giving it to a royal lady-in-waiting. If they want the Meng family's sweetness, they must first taste our bitterness. I replied, a cold smile touching my lips. Go, father. I will be there shortly. When I entered the main hall, the air was thick with suppressed tension. The guard commander, a man with a scar running through his left eyebrow, stood by the door with his hand on his sword. Seated in the guest chair was an older woman in a high-collared purple gown, her expression one of practiced, icy arrogance. This was Madame Tsin, Consort Shu's most trusted confidant. Madame Tsin looked at the cup of dark, murky tea on the table beside her, her lip curling in visible disgust. She did not even look at me as I entered, but spoke to the air in front of her. The Meng family's hospitality is indeed unique, she said, her voice thin and sharp. One would think that the wealthiest merchant in the capital could afford more than dishwater. The Meng family values honesty, Madame Tsin, I said, taking my seat across from her. This tea represents our current state. With the market in turmoil and debts being called in across the city, we find ourselves with very little sweetness to spare, even for royal guests. Madame Tsin finally turned her eyes toward me. They were sharp, like a hawk's, calculating and cold. Do not play riddles with me, girl. Her Highness Consort Shu is aware of the troubles you have caused for Prince Jing. The grain market crash, the pressure on the pawnshops. These are childish games that could easily lead to a charge of destabilizing the capital's peace. Destabilizing the peace. I laughed softly. The commoners are praising the emperor's benevolence because grain is finally affordable. If Her Highness wishes to punish me for making sure the poor do not starve, I will gladly accept the shackles. Madame Tsin narrowed her eyes. She leaned forward, the gold pins in her hair glinting. Let us speak plainly. Prince Jing requires 300,000 taels of silver by the end of the month. The Southern River Conservancy project needs a private infusion of capital to ensure the dams are completed before the winter floods. In exchange or this donation, the Meng family will be granted a royal merchant certificate, and your previous insolence regarding the marriage scroll will be forgotten. My heart skipped a beat. But not from fear. The Southern River Conservancy. There it was. The bait I had been waiting for. In my previous life, Prince Jing had embezzled the silver meant for the dams to pay his personal debts, leading to a flood that killed thousands. He had blamed the disaster on the local magistrates, who were then executed. 30,000 taels is a significant sum, even for us, I said, lowering my gaze to pretend I was considering the offer. And the River Conservancy is a heavy responsibility. If the Meng family provides the silver, we would need to see the official ledgers of the project to ensure our donation is properly recorded for the Emperor's eyes. Madame Tsin's expression softened slightly, a flicker of triumph crossing her face. She thought she had won. She thought the merchant girl was finally succumbing to the lure of a royal title. The ledgers are under the jurisdiction of the prince's office, Madame Tsin said smoothly. But if you bring the first installment of 100,000 taels to the prince's residence tomorrow evening, his advisors will allow your father to review the necessary documents. My father is unwell from the stress of these past few days, I said, looking up with a mask of humble concern. I will come myself. I have managed the Meng family accounts since I was 12. I believe the prince would prefer to deal with someone who understands the flow of silver. Madame Tsin smirked. Very well. Tomorrow at sunset. Do not be late. Miss Meng, the prince's patience is not infinite. As soon as they left, I didn't return to the ancestral hall. Instead, I headed straight for the back gate where a small, nondescript carriage was waiting. To the Huo residence. I told the driver. The meeting with Huolin this time took place in a smaller, more secluded courtyard hidden behind a wall of weeping willows. He was standing by a stone pond, feeding the dark carp that swirled in the cold water. He didn't turn around as I approached. The bait has been taken, I said without preamble. Consort Shu sent Madame Tsin to demand 300,000 taels for the River Conservancy. They want me at the prince's residence tomorrow night with the first 100,000. Huolin scattered the last of the fish food. His movements were slow, deliberate, and predatory. And you agreed. I agreed to see the ledgers, I replied. Prince Jing is desperate. He will show me the real books, the ones that show the current deficit, prove why he needs my money. He doesn't realize that by showing me those books, he is handing me the rope for his own hanging. Huolin turned around. The moonlight caught the sharp edge of his cheekbone, casting half his face into deep shadow. You are going into the tiger's den alone. If he suspects you are stalling or playing him, you will not leave that residence alive. Not even I can intervene inside a prince's walls without a direct imperial decree. I won't be alone, I said, reaching into my sleeve and pulling out a small, intricately carved jade whistle. The Meng family has its own shadows, Minister Hua, but I need you to be ready. The moment I exit those gates, the evidence will be in my hands. You must have your men positioned to intercept the prince's messengers before they can reach the palace to alert consort Shu. Huolin stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the small space. He reached out, his hand hovering near my throat for a second before he tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His fingers were cold, sending a shiver down my spine that wasn't entirely from the wind. "You are a dangerous woman, Meng Lan," he whispered. "Most people would be content with saving their fortune. You want to tear down a dynasty's pillar. A pillar that is rotten only brings the house down eventually," I replied. Meeting his gaze, "I am simply clearing the site for a stronger one." Huolin's eyes flashed with a dark, appreciative light. "Tomorrow at sunset, the Ministry of Justice will have 300 men stationed in the surrounding alleys of the prince's residence. If you do not emerge by the third watch, I will burn the gates down myself under the pretext of a fire investigation. Then it is a deal," I said. I left the Huo residence and returned home to prepare. I spent the rest of the night in my study, not looking at ledgers, but sharpening a small, silver-handled dagger. I hid it in the special compartment of my sleeve. The next evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and angry orange, I stood before the gates of the Prince Jing residence. The heavy iron-studded doors groaned open, swallowing me into the darkness of the inner courtyard. The air inside was cold, smelling of damp stone and old secrets. I followed the silent guards through a labyrinth of corridors until we reached the prince's private library. Prince Jing was waiting. He looked different than I remembered from my past life, less like a majestic royal and more like a cornered animal. His eyes were bloodshot, and there was a frantic energy in the way he paced the room. "Miss Meng," he said, stopping and looking at me with a mixture of hatred and desperate hope. "I trust you brought what we discussed." "I brought the first installment of silver, Your Highness," I said, placing a heavy, cloth-wrapped bundle on the table. "And I am here for the ledgers. The Meng family does not throw money into a bottomless pit without seeing the depth," he growled. But he waved a hand toward a stack of black-bound books on the corner of his desk. "There, the River Conservancy accounts. Look all you want. Just give me the silver." I walked over and picked up the first book. My fingers traced the entries, my mind quickly calculating the massive discrepancies between the reported costs and the actual spending. It was all there, the proof that he had siphoned off over 200,000 taels for his own use. "This will take some time to verify," I said, my heart pounding against my ribs. "You have 1 hour," Prince Jing snapped, sitting down and pouring himself a cup of wine with shaking hands. "After that, you sign the transfer for the remaining 200,000, or you don't leave this room." I sat down, opened my own portable inkstone, and began to copy the key figures onto a hidden layer of thin silk tucked inside my sleeve. The game was reaching its climax, and in the silence of the library, the only sound was the scratching of my brush and the ticking of a clock I knew would soon strike the hour of his ruin. The candle on the desk sputtered, the wick drowning in a pool of melted wax before flaring up one last time. In that momentary surge of light, the ink on my hidden silk scroll glistened a map of numbers, names, and dates that spelled the end of a royal legacy. I worked with the precision of a diamond cutter, my brush barely touching the surface, recording the discrepancies that Prince Jing thought were buried under layers of bureaucratic jargon. Across the room, Prince Jing poured his third cup of pear blossom wine. The liquid sloshed over the rim, staining the dark wood of the table. His eyes were fixed on the heavy bundle of silver banknotes I had brought, his fingers twitching with a greed that surpassed his common sense. In my past life, this man's arrogance had been his armor. In this life, his desperation was his noose. "Have you finished, girl?" he barked, the wine making his voice raspier. "My patience is as thin as that silk you're so fond of wearing. If you've verified the accounts, sign the final transfer. I have no more time for merchant games." I didn't look up. I was recording the final entry. 20,000 taels diverted to a General Wei in the borderlands sub-bribe for military support. "Almost, Your Highness. These accounts are complex. I see here that the stone for the southern river dams was purchased at 4 times the market rate from a quarry in Shaanxi. And yet, the quarry itself is owned by your maternal uncle. The room went cold. The sound of the wine cup hitting the table echoed like a gunshot. Prince Jing stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the stone floor. He crossed the distance between us in 3 long strides, his shadow looming over me like a predatory bird. "You dare question where I source my materials?" he hissed, leaning down until I could smell the sour scent of wine on his breath. "A merchant's daughter exists to provide gold, not to audit the affairs of the state. You are here to pay for your insolence and to buy back your family's miserable lives. Do not forget your place." I finally looked up, meeting his bloodshot eyes with a calm that seemed to unnerve him. "My place is exactly where the silver is, Your Highness. And right now, all the silver is in my hands, not yours. If these dams fail in the spring because you used cheap, porous limestone instead of granite, the Emperor will not care who your uncle is. He will only care who held the brush." Prince Jing's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with crushing force. "You little viper. I should have had you executed the moment you tore that scroll. You think you're clever, hiding behind Huolin. He is a dog of the Emperor, and dogs can be put down." I felt the cold bite of his grip, a familiar sensation from my past life when he would drag me across the room in a fit of rage. But this time, I wasn't the weeping girl begging for mercy. I felt the weight of the silver-handled dagger hidden in my sleeve against my forearm. "Minister Hu is not my shield, Your Highness," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "He is my witness, and you have just handed him everything he needs." "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his grip tightening. I used my free hand to subtly tug a thin silk thread near my collar. Outside, in the darkness of the garden, a faint, high-pitched whistle sounded not from me, but from my shadow guard who had been waiting for my signal. It was the sound of the trap snapping shut. "The ledger you just let me copy isn't just a record of theft," I said, leaning in closer, my eyes reflecting the dying candlelight. "It's a confession. I've sent the first half to the Ministry of Justice via my father an hour ago. The second half is right here, in my sleeve. If I don't walk out of those gates in 10 minutes, the ministry will move not just against your shops, but against your title." Prince Jing recoiled as if stung, releasing my wrist. He looked at the black-bound books on the desk, then at me, realization dawning on his face. You never intended to give me the silver." "Oh, the silver is real," I said, gesturing to the bundle on the table. "But consider it the funeral expenses for your political career. It's a bribe to ensure the guards at the capital gates don't stop you when you inevitably try to flee tonight." "Bitch." He lunged for my throat. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. The doors to the library burst open with a resounding crash. The heavy oak panels slammed against the stone walls, and a dozen men in the black and crimson uniforms of the Ministry of Justice flooded the room. At their head was Huolin, his long sword already drawn, the steel gleaming like a sliver of ice in the moonlight that spilled through the open doors. "Prince Jing," Huolin said, his voice cold and echoing in the vaulted room. "By order of the Emperor's secret decree, you are under investigation for the embezzlement of disaster relief funds and illegal collusion with border generals." "Step away from the girl." Prince Jing froze, his hands trembling. He looked at the soldiers, then at Huolin, his face contorting with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. "Huolin, you have no authority. I am a prince of the blood. This girl, she tricked me. She forged these documents." Huolin didn't even look at him. His eyes were on me, scanning for any sign of injury. When his gaze met mine, there was a fleeting moment of something not warmth, but a deep, shared understanding. I gave a small, imperceptible nod. I was unharmed. "The documents bear your personal seal, Your Highness," Huolin said, stepping forward. The tip of his sword hovered inches from Prince Jing's chest. "And Miss Meng has been acting as a confidential informant for the ministry. Her safety is the state's concern. Men, take the ledgers, and take the prince." The guards moved efficiently. Prince Jing was stripped of his outer robe and shackled, his curses echoing down the hallway as he was dragged away. The library, once a den of quiet corruption, was now a crime scene. I stood by the desk, my legs finally beginning to shake as the adrenaline began to fade. I reached out to steady myself against the dark wood. Huolin walked over to me. He sheathed his sword with a sharp metallic click. Without a word, he reached into his own cloak and pulled out a flask of warm tea, placing it in my hand. "You stayed too long," he said, his voice low. "Another minute and I would have had to kill the guards at the gate to get to you." "I needed the second half of the ledger," I replied, taking a small sip of the tea. It was bitter, but it cleared the fog in my head. Without the link to General Wei, he could have claimed the embezzlement was just a family dispute. Now, he's a traitor. Huolin looked at the stack of banknotes still sitting on the table, and the 100,000 taels. "A gift to the ministry's Widows and Orphans Fund," I said, a faint smile appearing on my face. "Consider it the Meng family's way of thanking you for the late-night escort." Huolin looked at me for a long moment, the intensity of his gaze making my breath hitch. "You give away a fortune as if it were pocket change. What do you truly want? Meng Lan? Power? Revenge? Or something else?" "I want to sleep without dreaming of blood," I said, the memory of my execution in the past life flashing behind my eyes. "And I want the Meng family to never again be a stepping stone for someone else's throne." Huolin nodded slowly. "The carriage is waiting. I will escort you home personally. The streets of the capital are not safe for A.W. Oman, who just toppled a prince." As we walked out of the Hu estate, the rain had stopped. The air was crisp and smelled of autumn leaves. For the first time since my rebirth, the weight on my chest felt lighter. Prince Jing was in the dungeons. His mother, Consort Shu, would be next. The web I had spun was holding, and the spider was finally beginning to win. But as I sat in the carriage, watching Huolin ride alongside on his black stallion, I realized that the court was a much larger game than a single prince. To survive the coming storm, I would need more than just silver. I would need the man riding beside me. "Minister Hua," I called out through the window. He pulled his horse closer, the leather of his saddle creaking. "Yes. Don't burn the ledger entries for the Southern River Conservancy," I said. "We need to ensure the dams are actually fixed. I will provide the granite myself. At cost. No profit." In the dim light, I saw the corner of his mouth lift a real smile this time. Though it was as sharp as a blade, I expected no less. "Miss Meng, rest now. Tomorrow, the real war begins." The carriage rolled into the Meng estate, and as the gates closed behind us, I closed my eyes, letting the darkness take me into a dreamless sleep for the first time in 2 lives. The morning after Prince Jing's arrest, the autumn rain cleared, leaving the air thin and biting. My father's hands shook as he held the bowl of ginger tea. The steam rose between us, but it did not warm the icy tension that hung in our private study. "Manor, the news has reached the palace. Prince Jing is in the imperial prisons. But Consort Shu has been kneeling outside the Hall of Mental Cultivation since dawn, barefoot, demanding the emperor execute Huolin for treasonous slander." "Let her kneel," I said calmly, tracing the painted edge of my teacup. "The stone steps are cold in autumn. At her age, her knees will not tolerate more than 2 shichens before she must either rise or faint. Either way, the emperor's suspicion has already been planted." My father sighed, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and dread. "But the emperor is volatile. Lanner, if he decides to protect his royal son to save the dignity of the imperial house, the Meng family will be the first scapegoats. Protecting a son is one thing, father. Tolerating a threat to his throne is another," I replied, my voice steady. The ledger I copied didn't just show stolen river funds. It showed 30,000 taels sent to General Wei on the northern border. For our emperor, who took the throne through a bloody coup. Military collusion is a sin that cannot be forgiven, not even for his favorite son. Before my father could speak, a servant entered, bowing low. "Miss Master Hu's carriage is at the side gate. He wishes to see you immediately." I wrapped my wool cloak around my shoulders and went out into the cold courtyard. Huolin was waiting inside a plain, unmarked carriage, his dark eyes shadowed by a lack of sleep. His black official robes were slightly rumpled, but his presence was as sharp as ever. Consort Shu has made her move," he said as soon as I climbed inside. She didn't just plead with the emperor. She sent a secret order to her family's guards to clean out the Baoyuan pawnshop. They are going to silence Steward Qian and burn the remaining ledgers. I expected nothing less from her, I said, leaning back against the carriage wall. Steward Qian knows where all the physical silver went. If he dies, Prince Jing can claim the ledgers I provided were forged by the Meng family to escape our marriage contract. Huolin looked at me, a dangerous glint in his eyes. And did you secure him? 2 days ago, before I even set foot in the prince's residence. I had my men purchase the mortgage on Steward Qian's family estate in the suburbs. I revealed. His wife, his 3 sons, and his elderly mother are currently guests at one of our secure warehouses in Tongzhou. If he wants them to live, he must speak the truth in the imperial court. Huolin let out a low, dark chuckle. You are more ruthless than half the magistrates in the Ministry of Justice. Meng Lan. But Consort Shu's men are already at the pawnshop. If they burn it, the physical evidence of the silver trail is gone. The court requires more than just one man's confession. Let them burn it, I replied, a cold smile playing on my lips. In fact, I helped them. I ordered my servants to scatter dry straw and oil near the back entrance of the pawnshop this morning. Huolin's brow furrowed. Explain. If the pawnshop burns quietly, it is a misfortune, but if it burns while the Ministry of Justice has already sealed it, it is a blatant destruction of imperial evidence. I explained. I have already arranged for 3 censors from the Imperial Academy to visit the tea house directly opposite the pawnshop this morning. They will witness Consort Shu's men lighting the fire. When the ashes settle, the charge against Prince Jing will upgrade from embezzlement to treasonous cover-up. Huolin stared at me, the intensity of his gaze almost palpable in the small space. You used the censors. They are the most stubborn, righteous men in the capital. Once they see the royal family destroying evidence, they will flood the emperor's desk with memorials by noon. Exactly, I said. And the emperor, to appease the court and maintain the illusion of his absolute justice, will have no choice but to strip Prince Jing of his titles and exile him. As for Consort Shu, her power in the harem will crumble once her son is declared a traitor. Suddenly, the carriage jerked to a stop. The driver's voice came from outside, tense and low. Master, the pawnshop is on fire. The smoke can be seen from 3 streets away. I pulled back the velvet curtain of the carriage window. In the distance, thick black smoke curled into the gray autumn sky, rising like an altar to my vengeance. We need to seal the northern border connection now, I told Huolin, turning my head back. General Wei must be recalled to the capital for questioning. If the emperor suspects military rebellion, no royal pardon will save Prince Jing. Even the late emperor's scroll cannot pardon treason against the current monarch. Huolin's eyes darkened, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. General Wei is a proud man. He will not come quietly. But I have his deputy's confession already in my custody. The arrest warrant was signed by the Grand Secretary this morning. Good, I said, a sense of relief washing over me. Then the trap is complete. We sat in silence for a moment as the carriage moved away from the burning pawnshop. Huolin reached out, his gloved hand gently catching my chin, forcing me to look at him. His touch was firm, but not painful. You play this game as if you've lived it before. Meng Lan, he murmured, his eyes searching mine for secrets I could never tell him. Every step, every reaction. You predict them as if you've already seen their deaths. I kept my expression neutral, though my heart beat a wild rhythm against my ribs. A merchant must study his customers' habits to survive. Minister, I have spent my whole life studying the greed of princes. It is not difficult to predict where a hungry wolf will run when the sheepfold is closed. He let go of my chin, but his gaze didn't waver. Let us hope the wolf doesn't turn and bite the shepherd. The shepherd has a very strong hound by her side, I replied with a faint smile. Looking at him, by afternoon, the capital was flooded with the censors' memorials. The emperor, furious at the blatant destruction of evidence under the ministry's seal, stripped Prince Jing of his titles and ordered him to be kept in the imperial prisons pending trial. Consort Shu was confined to her palace. Her influence shattered. I stood in my garden as the rain began again, washing away the ashes that had drifted from the south of the city. I had survived the first storm, and the man who had destroyed my family in my past life was now rotting in a cell. But the game was only beginning. The story is now complete. Thank you for listening. Feel free to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Thank you.